I basically want a duel. A really good duelist, like this. There we go. Yay, Imani just jumped down on me, and now I feel kind of confident that I can just jump in there, get the double, get the triple, follow up with a quad on Cyberbolt. And can we get the penta? Yes, we can. Oh, what a way to start off the video. Hey, what's going on, guys? This is AndrewChicken, and welcome back to another video. Buck is an incredibly powerful flank champion with strong burst, self-sustain, and mobility. He can prepare for just about any situation with his different builds, and is also one of the easier flanks to get extreme value out of once you understand his playstyle. That's why in today's long-awaited guide, I'll be going over my tips, tricks, and loadouts to help you improve at Buck, the unyielding juggernaut of the flank class. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. As always, we're going to start off with an overview of his kit before getting into his different loadouts. His primary fire is his shotgun, a simple hit-scan weapon which deals 700 damage per second at close range, and it can hit headshots for even more damage. Buck's shotgun actually has a rather tight choke on it, meaning it's still somewhat effective at medium range, although you don't want to use it at long range if you don't have to. Buck's shotgun also has a unique style of reloading unlike any other champion in Paladins, where he reloads shot by shot instead of using some form of clip. You can actually interrupt his reload by shooting after just one bullet has been reloaded, which can be helpful if you've run out of ammo and just need one more shot to finish off a target. This also makes Buck one of the better champions to buy deft hands on, although I still don't advise purchasing this item instead of or before Cauterize in most situations. Buck's next ability is his net shot, which deals 200 damage and applies a 50% slow to whoever it hits for 2 seconds. It's a projectile, which means you'll need to take into account its relatively fast travel time when aiming it at long distances, but most of the time you'll be using this in close quarters anyways, so the travel time is negligible. You can also fire his net shot immediately after shooting a shot, which can give you an extra bit of burst after your engagement shot and can make it harder for the enemy to escape your wrath. His net shot also has a finite range of 250 units, so while it can hit targets who are pretty far away, you still can't really snipe with it that effectively, nor would you ever want to in the first place. Net shot is augmented by the talent Ensnare, which increases the damage you deal to the enemy affected by net shot by 20% for a minimum of 2 seconds. It also increases the damage of net shot by 0.5 seconds, which is rather helpful. Now, the wording of this talent may be a bit confusing when it comes to how long the extra damage boost lasts. Essentially, how this works is that the bonus damage lasts as long as the duration of net shot, so if net shot lasts for 4 seconds, you'll get 20% increased damage for 4 seconds. However, if an enemy buys Resilience, which lowers the duration of the net shot to below 2 seconds, you'll still get the bonus damage for at least 2 seconds. Pretty simple. Now, something interesting about Buck is that he wasn't always a flank champion. When he was first released back in closed alpha, he was actually a tank, and this next ability is a vestige of that old version of Buck. Recovery lets Buck channel his monastic powers and heal himself for 1000 health over 1.5 seconds, which is some pretty powerful sustain for a flank to have. However, the downside to this ability is that you can't use any abilities or shoot while you're using it, and you can't cancel it either, meaning once you use this ability, you're committed to healing yourself for the next 1.5 seconds. So you have to be careful when using this, and I recommend using it between fights to heal yourself quickly to get back in combat, or behind cover if you're being chased by an enemy. Recovery is augmented by Bulk Up, which causes it to instantly heal you for 400 health, and increase your maximum HP by 300 for up to 5 seconds, making you even tankier when using this ability. This is a really helpful talent to run into champions that'll deal gobs of damage to you, or if you just don't trust your healer to do a good job. Buck's movement ability is his Heroic Leap, which is basically a super jump ability that propels him up and over the battlefield. He has full air control when he's leaping, which makes it easy to control where you land, and you can also use other abilities such as shooting or recovery while leaping. Where you point your mouse has some influence on where your jump will go, so if you look up, you'll jump higher, whereas if you look forward, you'll go farther. It's a really straightforward movement ability, and it's super powerful when used well. Heroic Leap is augmented by the powerful talent Bounce House, which causes him to deal 600 damage and knock up enemies within 20 units of where you land. One key thing to note with this talent is the difference between a knockback and a knock-up. A knockback would push enemies away from where you land, whereas the knock-up which this talent has simply sends them up into the sky. You won't be knocking anyone off the map with this talent, which isn't necessarily a bad thing considering that you can just kill them with his burst. Buck's final ability is his ultimate, Buck Wild. This ability refills your ammo and causes you to fire 60% faster for 6 seconds, without draining any ammo. This is a powerful ability for quickly sending gobs of damage at the enemies, and is good in a lot of situations. Have you run out of ammo in a fight and quickly need to take out a threat? Use your ult. Have a tank chasing you down who wants to kill you? Use your ult and shred them to pieces. You can't really go wrong with this ult, but you do have to keep in mind that you may draw the attention of nearby enemies when you use this ult, because it's really, really loud. But with that said, let's get into the loadouts for his different playstyles, and also get into some of the more advanced tips regarding each talent. So, let's start off with what's arguably the most fun build for its ability to snowball kills and stomp an entire enemy team, the Bounce House build. Bounce House is a really fun talent to use when there's a bunch of low mobility champions and not many cripples on an enemy team, with champions like Strix, Ceres, Vivian, Pip, or pretty much anyone else who is vulnerable to a dive build like this being great targets to use this build against. However, I would caution against using this build when there are a lot of cripples present or champions who can fly away really easily. Champions like Genos, Atlas, Maeve, Eevee, and Drogos make this build a little bit harder to use to its fullest potential, and this playstyle may even get you killed more frequently against certain anti-dive champions. But anyways, let's get into the build. My Bounce House build looks something like this, with Stomping Ground and Momentum being the key cards that define the loadout. Stomping Ground is one of the most powerful cooldown reset cards in the game, reducing all active cooldowns by 75% when you get a kill. However, you have to be the one who lands the kill, because if you simply get an assist, you won't actually get the cooldown reduction. However, as we'll see in a bit, getting kills with Bounce House isn't exactly that hard to do. Momentum is a really good card for keeping you alive as you engage with a target, granting you a whopping 20% damage reduction for 4 seconds after leaping, which is extremely valuable. The other cards in this build are really just useful fillers, with Leg Day getting you a bit of extra reach on your leap, and Rapid Sustain helping you get a bit more healing out of recovery and other sources of healing when you're low. Exhilarate is a nice card I like to use in my Bounce House build, since it further reduces the cooldown of your leap when you hit an enemy with it. It's not the best card in the world, since it has a 5-second internal cooldown and it only procs once, no matter how many enemies you hit with your heroic leap. However, it's still really helpful when you get that first kill to quickly leap onto a second target and chain into a multi-kill. Now, let's talk about how the Bounce House playstyle works. Like I said earlier, this build works best against low mobility targets that can't cripple you or otherwise stop your leap from working, so I would hazard using it against Genos, Grover, Atlas, etc. Ideally, you want to single out a target who is far away from their team, alone, or otherwise just in the very back of the enemy team, and then catch them by surprise by quickly leaping, shooting, and using net shot midair, slamming down on them with Bounce House, then shooting them while they're in the air, which will usually kill most squishy targets, assuming you hit at least one headshot. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to hit headshots with Buck, because his headshots hit like a truck and can be the difference between quickly getting a kill and getting out, or spending 1 extra second confirming a kill on a target only to get bursted down when the enemies notice you. Luckily, this isn't too hard with his shotgun, so as long as your aim is decent, this shouldn't be that much of a problem. But anyways, once you've got 1 kill, you can usually immediately jump onto the next closest champion and repeat the process. Or if the enemies have immediately turned around and started blasting at you, use your leap to retreat into safety. This is why Stomping Ground is so important, because it lets you dive into the enemies, get a kill, then either chain into a multi-kill or quickly leave the situation alive. The damage reduction from the build is also extremely helpful for this, because it makes it so you'll be less likely to die when engaging in this fashion. Bounce House Buck is all about using the element of surprise and bursting down your enemies before they can even do anything about you, and this build will help you do that extraordinarily well. Another thing to know about this build is that the knock-up on his leap can actually cancel certain enemy movement abilities. If you pounce on a Ceres who is trying to cast Shadow Travel or a Kinessa who's storing her teleporter, it will actually interrupt those abilities and force them to use it again. If you can time your leap to interrupt these abilities, it usually means that you can score an easy kill on whoever you're trying to attack. Other than that, there's not much to say about this build. Bounce House is really just a game of surprising your enemies, bursting them down in mere seconds, then either repeating the process until they're all dead, or retreating back to safety. As long as you master the relatively simple mechanics of his leap, net shot, and shotgun, this won't be that hard to pull off. The hard part of this build is timing when to go in and when to get out. You don't want to jump in on a bunch of enemies when they're all looking at you, but instead try and ambush them while they're focused on somebody else like your tank. Try and be sneaky until you're ready to pounce on the enemies like a jaguar hunting its prey, and then when you do pounce on an enemy, be ruthless and swift when you send them back to spawn in a body bag. It's really simple with some practice. Anyways, let's talk about the Ensnare build next. This is a really good build when you anticipate that you won't be able to dive the enemies with Bounce House, or when there's a bunch of tanks that you'll have to fight off. Ensnare gives you more damage against targets that you've slowed with Net Shot, which makes it a more elegant, safer approach to flanking than the rambunctious playstyle of Bounce House. However, it's not always the best option when going against someone who can cleanse crowd control effects, such as Eevee or Koga. Let's take a look at the build. Now, the defining feature of any good Ensnare build is going to be the card Bully, which grants you up to 60% lifesteal against your net shot target, which is just absolutely ridiculous. However, what's interesting to know about this card is that it can stack with the item Life Rip without diminishing returns, meaning that you can get some absolutely ludicrous healing per shot if you max out both Bully and Life Rip. This is further amplified by the card Rapid Sustain if you're at low health, so if you land a headshot under the right conditions, you can heal for over 1000 HP instantly. This turns Ensnare from a helpful tool that deals more damage to a target, to a powerhouse talent that makes it nearly impossible to kill without some insane focus fire or cauterize 3. You can also get the healing on not just 1, not just 2, but 4 shots when using the card Tangled, which increases the duration of your slow. This is why Ensnare with a build like this is better to use against tanks than Bounce House, since you'll be able to brawl with tanks using a ridiculous sustain and Bounce House on each shot. You can also use this insane sustain and damage during your ultimate, which turns just about any champion you cast your net onto into a joke. Now, actually playing Ensnare is even easier than Bounce House. All this build requires is that you get close enough to a squishy target that you want to fight, then cast your net on them and immediately shoot your weapon for some nice quick burst. Then just finish them off, ideally with a headshot so you don't need to fire a third shot afterwards. You can use your leap to either chase a target or to get out of a sticky situation, but you need to be careful not to jump into a group of enemies, just like with the first build. Buck is a powerful duelist, but he struggles in group fights, so do keep that in mind. Also, one thing I want to mention with this build is that the sustain from Bully is often way better to use than your recovery during a duel, especially if you bought Life Rip as well. If you can't get behind cover to use recovery, then just use net shot on a target and keep shooting them. This way, you'll still get comparable healing to recovery, and you'll also actively be doing damage to them instead of just sitting there, healing. Recovery is a great tool to use in the downtime between fights to get you ready to attack again, or to use when you're behind cover and have a second to heal up when the enemy is chasing you down. Doing something like engaging with an enemy using Heroic Leap, then just using recovery in their face, does nothing except make you look silly, especially if the enemies have some level of cauterize. Speaking of recovery, let's talk about his last build, Bulk Up. Bulk Up is very helpful if you want to be an indomitable cockroach that just can't be killed, since it heals you for a ridiculous amount and is often coupled with some ridiculous damage reduction to boot. I recommend using this if you don't trust your healer, or if you expect that you're going to need to tank a ludicrous amount of damage from someone like Cassie or Leon, and it can also be a good sort of anti-flank build, since it effectively turns you into a pretty strong close quarters brawler that's really hard to kill. Basically, if you don't think you'll be able to die very well with Bounce House, and you don't want to go Ensnare because there's not that many tanks, but there's a bunch of squishy flanks to beat up, this is the option that can make you really annoying to fight against. Bulk Up builds usually go for the powerful card Deep Breath, which gives you a whopping 30% damage reduction for 2 seconds when you use recovery, which is just insane considering that with Bulk Up, it's giving you tons of healing and increasing your maximum health as well. I also like using the powerful cooldown reduction card Reconstruction in this build, so that your recovery is frequently available for you to use. Rapid Sustain is also good to run with this build, since it will give you even more healing when you're at low health. This build essentially just forces the enemies to put in twice the effort to kill you if they don't have Cauterize 3. So how do you go about playing with this build? Well, you still don't really want to just jump into a group of enemies if you don't have to. You want to go looking for some isolated targets that you can 1v1, get in range, start shooting them, and then when they do a bit of damage to you, use recovery to negate everything that they just did to you. Ideally, you want to time your recovery to mitigate a large burst of damage like a Shaolin arrow, since it gives you 30% damage reduction with Deep Breath. Then once your recovery is over, just finish the enemy off. Now, I know that I said earlier that recovery shouldn't exactly be used in the enemy's faces, and some of that still applies with the whole leaping into engage, then just pressing recovery bit. However, this build makes recovery, which is only an average ability on his other builds, a full-blown monster for survivability that you can use in a similar way to Eevee's Ice Block or Moji's Magic Barrier. You shouldn't get reckless with this build though, because while it makes you really hard to kill, you are not invincible. Don't get too cocky, but don't be afraid to engage with an enemy either. This might be the easiest build to use with Buck, since it only requires you to have some good positioning and timing on when you engage with an enemy. Buck really isn't hard to play once you understand his builds, and once you develop the good timing and positioning that's key to doing well with any flank. Lastly, let's talk real quick about items. Obviously, just like on any flank, Cauterize is super important in most cases. However, there are also some other items that stand out as being really good to use with Buck. Like I mentioned earlier, Life Rip is one of the best items to use with an Ensnare build, since it can stack with the card Bully for some ridiculous self-sustain. Usually with Ensnare, I go for Cauterize and Life Rip right off the bat, and just upgrade those two items until they're maxed out. Kill to Heal can be really good with a Bounce House build, since you won't be getting that much self-sustain without it. Chronos can also be good if you're not using the card Stomping Ground at a high level, since its cooldowns are a bit on the lengthy side. Lastly, if you've already gotten all the items you need like Cauterize and Life Rip, Deft Hands actually isn't the worst way to go with Buck. Since he reloads shot by shot, Deft Hands will really cut down on the time it takes to reload your full shotgun, and it can seriously reduce the time it takes to reload one shot, which you can quickly fire off to finish off a target you are fighting. Buck is one of the few champions where it's actually not that bad to buy Deft Hands on, but I do not encourage getting Deft Hands instead of Cauterize unless the enemies just have absolutely no healing whatsoever. But anyways, that's going to be the end of the video. Did this buck guide help you out in some way? If it did, make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe for more content like this from me. Also make sure to check out the Discord server linked in the description to become a part of our active community of over 1,000 members. I also stream regularly on Twitch, so make sure to follow me there as well. Lastly, I want to give a huge shout out to the members of the channel for helping to support my content. If you want to support the channel and gain access to some fun emojis to use on comments and an exclusive role in the Discord server, then just click the join button right next to the subscribe button. It's cheap and it helps out a lot. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.